Hello everyone, and welcome to my 8th digital story. Our topic today is about digital gaming in second language teaching and learning. I'll be sharing with you and reflect on the pre-reading and also the Mage Duel language learning game, which we saw in the pre-reading videos. I also try to compare the Mage Duel to the ideas based on the TESOL call, which is in the chapter 14 of our readings for this time, and also try to share my lesson plan with you in a way that trying to integrate technology with ideas and content this time. And at the end, we will explore how Mage Duel fits into a broader context of language learning, and how can we use such or it in the classroom. First, let's start with the pre-reading, which is the first video, where the professor discussed two main concepts: gamification and game-based learning. Starting with the first, gamification, it involves adding game-like elements, such as points, leaderboards, and badges. These elements are added to the learning activities, which has the goal or its purpose is to make the learning more engaging and motivating. For instance, we can consider, for example, the game Kahoot, or another app, it's called Duolingo, which actually these can add a sort or a sense of competitions to the lesson itself. Another one is that game-based learning. This actually is similar to somehow to the gamification, but it's a step further, based on designing an entire learning activity as a game. So here, learning happens within the game itself, and the learning task is not just a part of the game, but they are the game. So we saw the example of the Freckle Big games, in which learners complete tasks to earn coins. So while this may increase engagement, the bad things or the downside of it is that the students or second language learners might just focus on the incentives rather than learning itself. Moving to the Mage Duel, as discussed in the pre-reading, which is the second video. This game, or Mage Duel, is a serious game developed for a special purpose, that is to improve language proficiency for US Air Force language analysts. It is actually a reflection or based on fantasy world of Dickens, where players use word magic, translation skills, so that they can complete quests and win quills. What makes this difference actually from the other games that we saw in the previous slide or in the first video is that Mage Duel actually sets its focus on semantic similarity. So instead of rewarding players for translating words for words, the game rewards players for how closely their translation can match the meaning of the specific or for the original sentence. So this makes the games or the design of the game very focused on the meaning. Now we will move to this slide to compare between Mage Duel and TESOL call concept, which is based on the chapter number 14. So to start the comparison, okay, so TESOL call actually place the emphasis on the use of language that is authentic. So the idea here is that learners practice language as in real life scenarios. So the task here reflects everyday communications and interactions involve such cultural context. When we compare both of the Mage Duel and TESOL calls concepts, we can see there are some similarities and differences. Starting with the similarities, Mage Duel shares one of the similarities with TESOL Call is that both of them they focus on the meanings when it comes to learning a language. Starting with the Mage Duel, so players they are rewarded based on how well their translations gets to the closely to the intended meanings, but it's not for how correct the translation or the word. This is actually similar to the TESOL call, which emphasizes on meaning-focused communications. The difference between them is that TESOL call actually places the importance of authentic real-world communications, which is, as we said, that when the learners they practice language in real-life scenarios. This is not exist or it's not true for Mage Duel. In Mage Duel, the set actually, or it's a reflection based on a fantasy world, so it doesn't provide learners with any cultural context. So even when it comes to the interaction or conversations, even though it helps them to build translation skills, but it doesn't offer them any cultural immersions, which the TESOL call actually emphasizes and encourages. Now I'll share with you my personal opinion on Mage Duel and TESOL call. First, I find that Mage Duel actually to be exciting and interesting, and in addition to that, engaging in a way to learn translation skills, and also one can or second language learner can build vocabulary. The competition here is between in Mage Duel actually and the elements within, especially when there are such rewards, can make the process motivating but also more fun for learners. But when we move to the TESOL call actually ideas, I found that I wasn't inclined with Mage Duel as first it was. As someone who's into video games, I found that when it comes to learning, it's not. I would prefer TESOL call on or over Mage Duel. The reason is that even though Mage Duel is or let's say it's useful for, as we said, building translation skills and also build the vocabulary at the same time. Another thing is that it helps to have a good semantic understanding, but it doesn't help one to be well prepared to be engaged with the real world, or let's say when to communicate with others having an authentic language. So actually for the Mage Duel actually is it lacks the conversational elements and of course cultural interactions that second language learners actually need for everyday language use, which this is what TESOL call actually emphasize. One thing to share with you when it comes to compare between TESOL call and Mage Duel is that we cannot downgrade Mage Duel and leave it or put it aside. Let's consider one example to understand the idea that I would like to share with you. So in the same fantasy adventure games, we assume that, or let's imagine that a player is a second language learners, and so he or she they are encountering the word stamina for the first time. So as they are playing and navigating through the world of the games, their characters actually, after engaging in a battle and so on, becomes or the player notices that there is like a message flashing over time, sending a message to the player is that the stamina is low. So the player doesn't understand what does that word mean or cannot grasp the semantic meaning of this. But over time, the player actually observes that the characters that is taking control over is slowing down or trying to or become weaker, and so the energy bar is depleting. So here, without giving any direct explanation, the player actually start to associate this over time or recurring message with the character's lack of energy. So over time, the player continues playing, and as soon as sees the flash or the word stamina mentioned in the screen, so the player here actually what is doing is that is going to develop an understanding and so associate between the word stamina and then the semantic meaning of the word. That is the ability to continue performing the task in a good way. The idea here is that why we are mentioning this example is that we cannot downgrade the games in general, is that we have to know there is something called incidental vocabulary learning in second language acquisition. So in that situation, the player learns new words naturally and through context rather than being instructed or receiving a direct instructions. So in the immersive environment, as in the game, so players and learners at the same time, they are exposed to meaningful and repeated interactions, even with the word stamina or any other words. And so this allowed them to infer the meanings based on their experience in these games. Now we will move to the lesson plan using Mage Duel for language learning. So we start with the objectives of the lesson plan. Here, the students will improve their transition skills and if they focus on semantic similarities, also build vocabulary, and in addition to that, they will practice using the language within that game and real-life communication through a mix of interactive role play, which we will see later. The materials for the class, we would need the applications for Mage Duel, and of course computers for the students and such flashcards. For the part of the activity, first, the instructor will need to explain the purpose of Mage Duel while giving a brief explanation about it. This actually, on the side of the instructor, needs to prepare this ahead and collect such example sentences encountered in this game. So then the instructor can share, as we see here in number 2, share some of these examples with the students. In addition to that, students can also be prepared ahead of time by sharing the topic with them. So when the students come to the class, they have to be well prepared, knowing the idea of the activity. After playing the game, we can start reviewing the words and the sentences, which part of the instructor can prepare this ahead by checking the game and so the content of the game, and then the instructor can discuss the sentences, the translation and the words with the students. It can be through participations, it can through by dividing the students into groups 2 or 3 depending on the number of the students, while considering such individual differences and so on. A third important idea here is that to introduce a role play scenarios, even though the game might be only designed based on a fantasy world, there is a possibility to have the contents of the game, which we refer in the situations, the sentences and the translation and the words, to implement it and to work in a real world scenarios, so that can benefit the students to use these sentences and the words in their real life. The outcome of the lesson plan is that second language learners will have improved their vocabulary and their translation skills. Second is that when implementing the role play scenarios, second language learning, they will not only have the ability to improve their competence, but also they will have practice using their language in scenarios that reflects the real world. Overall, we learned that digital games can offer new ways to engage second language learners, and this is through gamifications and game-based learning. Second, designing well games can also aid intrinsic motivations, language fluency, engagement, and of course, provide authentic cultural interactions, which, as we reflected before, based on implementing the role play scenarios. The third point is that there is a need to create a well-structured lesson plans that can fit second language learners while considering their individual differences. Thank you very much for watching my digital story this time, and feel free to comment and share your opinions. Thank you very much.